not well. It's a book that I thought I was gonna hate. Long story short, I was dating this guy. I'm just spilling the tea right now. I'm about to start crying. Like, am I okay? I've never thought about it that way. I cried. I ate this up. I'll start crying. This book, the first book that ever changed my life. What's up, you guys? It's Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new, and welcome to my first ever actual book video. There's my co-host over there. If you're new here, that is her water glass. This is her house. Reading has become so important to me over specifically the last year. I think it was just a matter of finding genres that I really love, series, authors, plots that I really love, and I am just enthralled. So for my first book video, it felt right to tell you about 5 books that changed my life. No exaggeration, changed the trajectory of my life, and I think about some aspect of all of these books on a weekly, if not daily basis. Here they are. I'm gonna go through each of them. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a summary kind of what the book's about if you haven't heard about it before or read it before. No spoilers. Actually, one of them will have a slight spoiler, but I'll put a timestamp in there if you want to skip that. And what about them I felt was life-changing for me and why. I feel like I'm doing an assignment in school and like giving a presentation, but this is way more fun than any presentation that I ever gave in school. This YouTube channel over the past almost 7 years has been a place where I talk about my emotions, I talk about my life, I show you my day-to-day, ups, downs, good, bad, the big moments and the little ones. And I talk about reading here and there in vlogs. Like if I'm in the vlog reading one of my books, I will kind of just be like, hey, I'm reading this, you know? But I haven't gone much deeper than that on here, which just feels wrong because it's such a big part of me. I also post about my books that I'm reading on my Instagram, so if you don't follow me on there and you want to keep up with that, I have a little highlight with all the books that I've read so far this year. I'm going to keep adding to it for the rest of the year, and then I will put like rating and review on my story when I finish them, and also just some like funny pictures if I have like a picture of me crying or something. You know how it is, or any other funny reactions. I'll add those too to my Instagram story. So that's what's going on. Welcome. Grab a drink, grab a coffee, a soda, a glass of wine if you're 21. And you know what goes perfectly with a good book? A glass of wine. Pouring myself a little glass of wine, cuddling up on my couch or in bed, reading my book at night. Oh! It's gonna do it. If you love that feeling too, but you, like I am, are intimidated by picking out wine, the wine aisle in general at the store, I have the answer for you, and it's Bright Cellars. Thank you so much to Bright Cellars for kindly sponsoring this portion of today's video. I talked about Bright Cellars a couple months ago, and I'm so happy to be talking about them again because I love Bright Cellars. I've had so much fun getting personalized wines sent to me from Bright Cellars and trying new things and learning about them. Basically with Bright Cellars, you take a short 7-question quiz, and based on your answers, its algorithm matches you with wine bottle selections that they think that you would like. It takes the guesswork out of it, which is so nice. And what's really cool is that each bottle comes with its own little wine education card so that you can learn about what you're drinking, what's in the bottle, where it's from. If you want to know more about wines, this is such an easy and fun way to do it. Also, if you don't like a bottle that you're sent, Bright Cellars Concierge will replace it for you, no problem. Bright Cellars is a subscription-based model, but you can easily skip shipments if you're not ready for a new one, or just altogether cancel your membership with no fuss. And you guys, Bright Cellars is giving my viewers an exclusive offer, okay? And it's your first 6-bottle subscription box, personalized wines just for you, 6 of them for only $55 when it's usually $150 or more. There'll be a link down in my description. Just click it, it'll take you to the website, take the quiz, get matched, and redeem this insane offer. First 6-bottle subscription box from Bright Cellars for only $55 when it's originally $150 or more. Thank you so much to Bright Cellars for sponsoring this portion of today's video. I just love a glass of wine with a good book. I felt like this was so relevant to this. And now let's get into the 5 books that changed my life. The very first one. This book I read in 2017. At the beginning of 2017, I was a senior in high school and I was going through some shit. I was in such a low point mentally. So much drama, specifically boy drama. Long story short, I was dating this guy. It was just so toxic. He broke up with me and started dating another girl literally within the same week. I'm pretty sure it was. It was just the craziest. Anyway, I was just not well. And this was me coming off of, me just spilling the tea right now. That was me coming off of another relationship before that. So I went from one heartbreak directly into another. And I was so upset and so angry. And I don't even remember how this book came to my attention, but this book, the first book that ever changed my life, was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Now, this book honestly has a lot of good perspectives and ways to look at life. This is a nonfiction book. It's described as a self-help book without the self-helpiness. So it's kind of an unconventional, different style of self-help, but I really liked it because it says a lot of curse words, and I get that. I feel that. One of the first things this book talks about is that it's not about not giving a fuck about anything in life. It's about not giving a fuck about every single thing and choosing what is the most important to you to care about. You can't give a fuck about everything. You just don't have the capacity to. There was one specific lesson, if you will, piece of advice, perspective from this book that I think about every single day. I have thought about this every single day since I read it for the first time. This was genuinely groundbreaking to me. It changed my perspective completely, and this came at such a good time for me. This change of perspective genuinely changed everything for me. I did this with all the books. I marked like specific excerpts that really stuck with me, like the specific part of the book that did it for me. This is in the chapter called You Are Always Choosing. He talks about how his first girlfriend dumped him and she was cheating on him, and he was so angry at her and he held her responsible for his misery. And he talks about the difference between fault and responsibility. This is the quote that changed my life. Quote, "Many people may be to blame for your unhappiness, but nobody is ever responsible for your unhappiness but you. This is because you always get to choose how you see things, how you react to things, how you value things," end quote. And this gets into an even deeper conversation about control, what you can control and what you can't. You cannot control other people's actions. You can't control their words. You can't control what they do to you or against you or whatever. You can't control anything that anyone else does. The only person that you can control in the entire world is yourself. This literally smacked me in the face when I read it. I was like, oh my God, I've never thought about it that way. He says, quote, "Ultimately, while she was to blame for how I felt," the girlfriend who cheated on him, "she was never responsible for how I felt. I was," end quote. My ex-boyfriends in high school, they were to blame for how I felt. They were to blame for the sadness that I felt. But they, at the end of the day, were not responsible for my emotions. They were not responsible for my happiness or unhappiness. I was. I was like, right. Yeah, for sure. Last little passage, quote, "I began to understand that although she had done something horrible to me and she could be blamed for that, it was now my own responsibility to make myself happy again. She was never going to pop up and fix things for me. I had to fix them for myself," end quote. I literally think about that to this day, every single day. Moving right along to book number 2. This is going in chronological order. So this one I read, I think at the beginning of 2023, and this is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I first heard about this book on Lexi Hidalgo's podcast, The Moments podcast. I was intrigued by the plot, so I picked it up, and another book that just, I'm about to start crying. Like, am I okay? The perspective that I gained from this book, the insight that I gained was truly profound. And I want to say, before you read this book, look up the trigger warnings. There's one in particular that is a central theme of this book. But the thing that drew me to this book, aside from like the interesting kind of premise and the way that it was going to be framed in the plot, is that main trigger warning, because that is something I have dealt with. And to find a book that talked about that, I resonated with it so deeply. The central premise of this book, it follows a woman named Nora Seed, and she finds herself in a place called the Midnight Library. And the Midnight Library is essentially a place between life and death. The library is filled with all the alternate versions of her life. If she had changed one thing, done one thing, not done one thing, the way that the entire course of her life would have shifted, each book in this library contains each of those variations. The book takes you through the different lives that she basically tries on. She gets pulled back to the Midnight Library as soon as she starts to feel regret or disappointment or anything other than fulfillment from the life that she's trying on. She'll go back to the library, pick another one, and try another one. The cycle stops when she finds a life that she feels completely fulfilled in. The stories that unfolded, the lessons that came out of them about regret, fulfillment, happiness in life, changed my perspective on my own life. So, okay, this is where the spoiler's gonna come in, so I'm gonna put the timestamp down here if you don't want to hear. I have this little mark at the very end of the book. This is where the main lesson comes in. So skip to this part down here, this timestamp, if you don't want to know that. I honestly think you should still read the book even if you do listen to the spoiler, because it's really about the journey not just the destination, for you to understand like the magnitude of the destination she comes to. All right, spoiler alert, I'm gonna start talking now about it. Nora ends up back in the Midnight Library. She was living a life that she thought that she was happy in. She thought that she had everything that she needed. She thought she was gonna be fulfilled. She says, quote, "You said that if I found a life I wanted to live in, that I really wanted to live in, that I'd stay there. That was the life I wanted. That was the life." And then the librarian says, "Did you feel that all the time?" And then Nora says, "Yes, I mean, I wanted to, but I suppose maybe it wasn't my life. I hadn't made it by myself. I had walked into this other version of myself. I was carbon copied into the perfect life, but it wasn't me." At this point in the book, the Midnight Library is collapsing. She's running out of time to find a life that she wants to hop back into. The last book that Nora gets in the Midnight Library is blank. The librarian says, quote, "This one isn't already written. You have to start this." This is where it is, right here. Quote, "She had to want the life she always thought she didn't. Because just as this library is a part of her, so too were all the other lives. She might not have felt everything she had felt in those lives, but she had the capability. She might have missed those particular opportunities that led her to become an Olympic swimmer or a traveler or a vineyard owner or a rock star, blah, blah, blah. But she was still in some way all those people. They were all her. Those are all the lives she tried on. She could have been all those amazing things, and that wasn't depressing as she had once thought. It was inspiring, because now she saw the kinds of things that she could do when she put herself to work." I'm jumping from different lines because I have certain things highlighted, but she just needed potential. And she was nothing if not potential. She wondered why she had never seen it before. She didn't want to die, and she didn't want to live any other life than the one that was hers. The one that could be a messy struggle, but it was her messy struggle. A beautiful, messy struggle. End quote. Which I just thought was so powerful. It made me think about things in a completely different way. Big themes in this book were regret, loneliness, purpose, possibility, control, success, love. Nora felt a lot of regret for some of the decisions that she made in her original life that led her kind of to the point of feeling like she didn't have a purpose, but it was just perspective that she needed in order to see the possibility within her, which I just thought was so beautiful. Such a beautiful message. So yeah, highly recommend this book. Going along with books that have super, super deep themes, this is another one that you should definitely look up the trigger warnings of, but The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Wow, this book, I cried. I'll admit it, I cried. I actually cry a lot when I'm reading, so that's not even crazy. This is a historical fiction. It's set during World War II in Nazi-occupied France. It follows two sisters, Vianne and Isabel, and kind of both of their respective paths that they took during the war, how each of them dealt. It goes kind of between both of their perspectives and their different storylines. They merge together too, but Vianne is at home. She's trying to protect her family while her town is being occupied by the Nazis. And then her sister Isabel becomes involved in the actual resistance, literally risking her life to fight for her town, her country. This book is fiction, but it's inspired by real women during World War II and their stories of resilience and strength and courage. And it's just so unbelievably humbling and inspiring. Again, look up content warnings for this. This book was extremely heavy, but I am so glad that I read this book. This is another one that changed my perspective. This is not really a spoiler, I don't think. I feel like taken out of context, it definitely doesn't give away the premise of the story, and you should still read this book if you look up the content warnings and are okay with that. A specific quote from this book that made me cry and that I've thought about weekly since is as follows. Quote, "They couldn't touch my heart. They couldn't change who I was inside. My body, they broke that in the first days, but not my heart. Whatever he did, it was to your body, and your body will heal." End quote. To see this character go through some of the most horrific things a human being can go through, come out of it and have this perspective. I know that this is a fictional book, but it is based on real people. That is just so powerful. The resilience of the human heart and mind and soul. It just inspired me on levels I didn't even know that I needed. Moving on to this next book. Complete 180 from the last one. Like literally could not be more different from the last one. This book changed my life because it got me to love reading as much as I do now. And it has become something I look forward to, like I said, literally every single day of my life. Makes me so incredibly happy. It's just brought me such an amazing escape and brought me so much joy. And the book that started all of that was Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This is kind of like a romantasy book. This was my first fantasy genre book that I have read in years. I read the Twilight Saga when I was like in middle school. Technically the Midnight Library is a little bit fantasy because of the whole like concept of the Midnight Library realm, if you will. But this book was the first legitimate fantasy romantasy book that I've read in a hot minute. I have talked about this book countless times. Every time I talk about this book, I say that it changed my life because it did. It catapulted me into reading. I ate this up. This is one of my favorite books that I've ever read. So if you have not heard of Fourth Wing, I'm gonna give you a brief summary, no spoilers, and you should read this book. So the main character in this book is called Violet Sorrengail. She's 20 years old. She is the daughter of the general of their like armies. It takes place in a fictional land. It's called Navarre, and she's about to go into her first year at the War College. So there are 4 quadrants in the War College: the Scribe Quadrant, Healer's Quadrant, Infantry, and Rider's Quadrant. She is planning on going into the Scribe Quadrant. That's where her dad was. She trained her entire life to go into the Scribe Quadrant. That's a tongue twister. But her mother, who is the general, as I said, has other plans. And she sends her to the Rider's Quadrant, which honestly everybody else in her family and the people around her think is a death wish because she has not trained for that. She's not prepared. And the Rider's Quadrant is so extreme. It's deadly. It's cutthroat. The Rider's Quadrant trains these students to become dragon riders. Literally every way you turn in this quadrant, there's a test that is meant to weed out weaker riders because they want the strongest possible cavalry of dragon riders that they can have for the military. There are 2 kingdoms on this continent. So Navarre is the larger one. That's where this is taking place. That's where the War College is. Violet is from. The 2 kingdoms on the continent were at war with each other for 400 years. There was a rebellion. The children of the rebellion all are marked with rebellion relics, and those children also go to the same War College. I love the world building. I love the history. There's a lot of secrets that have been covered up or hidden, and it's just so much juicy shit going on. Violet going into the Rider's Quadrant, trying to survive. Her relationships with friends. There's found family, which I just absolutely love. There's her actual family dynamics, which that's a whole mess. There's the conflict in the world, which is a hot mess. And then there's the romance. I'll start crying. If you like enemies, I say that with a giggle because it's just like, if you've read this book, mortal enemies to lovers, read this book. If all of that other stuff wasn't enough, which I mean, yeah, fair enough, the romance. It's so good. It's so good. This book led me to read the Acotar series, A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is now one of my favorite series of all time. And now I'm reading Throne of Glass because I read Acotar. I think Throne of Glass might become my favorite series of all time because I love it so much. Basically, this book started it all. So this book changed my life, and it's just insane. Now, the 5th and final book in this video that changed my life is a book that I thought I was gonna hate. I started reading this book and I was like, this character, I'm at my wit's end with this character. But it turned into one of my favorite books that I've read, period. I think my second favorite of the whole series, but that's just because the one that is my favorite, like, cannot be topped because it's just too good. Like, the romance just killed me. Anyway, so I just mentioned Acotar, and this book is in that series. This is A Court of Silver Flames. This is the 5th book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. I'm gonna give a little bit of a brief synopsis of what A Court of Thorns and Roses is about in the first place, very general, that I can kind of give a little bit of context into this book. Court of Thorns and Roses, it's a fantasy novel, romantasy as some may categorize it, and it follows the journey of a girl named Farah Archeron. She's a human. She's trying to provide for her family who they had money and then lost their fortune. She's literally the youngest of 3 sisters. She's supporting herself, them, and her dad. Her mom passed away when she was young. This all happens in the very first book, like very early on in this series, so I don't think this is a spoiler, but this whole thing starts when she's out hunting one day and she shoots and kills this wolf in the woods. And after she kills it, she finds out that it was actually a fairy. So there's the mortal realm and there's the fairy realm. And fairy, everyone when they describe this book and this series, they're like, not fairy as in Tinkerbell fairy, fairy as in like big, strong creature fairy. And yeah, there's the fairies, which are more of like the creaturey looking things. They live in the fairy realm. There's magic and stuff. And then there's high fae. High fae are the fairies with more status, essentially. They resemble humans. When I first heard about this book, they're like, oh, it's about fairies. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? But don't let that deter you, okay? So the fairy realm, and specifically Prithian, which is where a lot of this takes place. It's broken up into 7 different courts, and each court is ruled by a high lord. Each of the high lords have kind of their inner circle, important players in the political realm of this world, and there's a lot of tea with that too. There was a war, there's always a war. That is the basic premise, okay? So this book, the 5th book, focuses specifically on Nesta Archeron, which is one of Farah's older sisters, and a character named Cassian, who is in the inner circle of the High Lord of the Night Court, which is like basically his found family. Without giving away spoilers, since this is the 5th book in a series and a lot has happened in the other books, Nesta is dealing with a lot of trauma from various different things that she's seen, that she's been through, that she's done. She has a lot of self-hatred, a lot of guilt, and she takes those things out on the people around her. She self-sabotages for a real one, basically. She's the queen of self-sabotage and just pushing everybody away because she doesn't want anyone to get close enough to her to care about her. And people do care about her, obviously, but she just wants to push them away because she doesn't want people to care about her because she doesn't feel like she deserves it. The part of this book that I feel like changed my life is the character development throughout this book. This book is almost 750 pages. Oh, it's over 750. A lot happens in this book. I found Nesta's journey through her trauma, trying to heal within, make meaningful connections with people, find self-love, allow people to care about her, forgive herself, the growth, the healing journey that she's on. I found so moving. At the beginning of the book, as I said, she pissed me off because she was just so mean to everybody. Like cruel to everybody who loved her, wanted to push all of them away. I knew like what had happened up to that point, but I didn't get her perspective on it and how deeply it had affected her. But throughout the book, that's revealed. And so I began to understand her more. And when I did understand her more, I related to her. There's a theme here, if you couldn't tell. I saw myself in Nesta's character. She's snappy. She's got a massive guard up, and she'll do anything pretty much to protect that. And throughout this book, she's learning how to break down some of those walls and let people in. And it's just such a beautiful thing to read. I don't know if this is necessarily a spoiler, but again, I'm gonna put the timestamp down here to when I'm done reading these. If you don't want to hear these little excerpts, they're from the end of the book, but I still think that, again, the entire book is worth reading because it's more about the journey than it is a couple excerpts taken from the end of the book. Timestamp. All right, let's get into it. So this is a conversation that was going on between Nesta and another character. Again, I'm skipping around a page and I only highlighted certain specific things, but the character said, "Is that not what you wanted, to feel nothing?" Nesta said, "I thought that was what I wanted, but no longer. I want to feel everything. I want to embrace it with my whole heart." The other character said, "Even the things that hurt and haunt you." And then Nesta says, "We need those things in order to appreciate the good. Some days might be more difficult than others, but I want to experience all of it, live through all of it." This is a very similar, I feel like, vibe to The Midnight Library and Nora's development. This was such an impactful thing to have happened because if you read the rest of the book, you would know how she didn't want to face those things and she didn't want to feel. She didn't want, you know, to let any of that in. And she got to the point where she realized that she needed to endure those things, experience them, and get through them and grow through them to appreciate the other beauties of life, which is just a lesson that I think we could all take in our own ways. That's it. Those are 5 books that changed the course of my life. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you liked it, my first ever book video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave me down below some comments, any requests or recommendations or anything specifically relating to books that you might want to see, vlogs, other sit-down videos, anything like that. I would love to hear your thoughts. Of course, my card was full when I was 30 seconds from being done recording. Thank you again so much to Bright Sellers for sponsoring a portion of today's video. You can click the link in my description and get your first 6-bottle subscription box from Bright Sellers for only $55 instead of $150. And yeah, I think that's it. I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.